Welcome.
It's time for the further adventures of Indiana Jones.
The greatest adventures of all time.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
Pack your bag, grab your passport, and prepare to go globetrotting with Marvel Comics' classic four-color adventures of Indiana Jones.
Jones?
Mr. Jones, I've heard a lot about you, sir. Your appearance is exactly the way I imagined.
Son of a...
I'm here now. What do you want to talk about?
Welcome, Further fans, IndyCast listeners, once again to the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones. I'm Joe Stuber. He's Keith Voss. Keith, the joint is jumping tonight. We've got a special guest in the Raven's Nest.
It sure is, man. Wow, the drinks are flowing, and you know what, Joe? We've got no time to lose this week, so let's head right on over to the VIP table to meet up with our very special guest.
Well, we're here in the Raven's Nest, and we're going over to our guest of honor table today. Man, really great timing here, coming off of issues 13 and 14. We've got the cover artist for those particular issues, and the resume is just stellar here. We've got New Mutants, Cloak and Dagger, Sleepwalker, Batman, of course, The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones. And if you're a fan of DC animation in the 90s, this is the guy we want to talk to. Superman, Batman, Batman Beyond, Justice League, legendary comic book artist and two-time Emmy winner, Bret Blevins. Welcome to the Raven's Nest and the IndyCast, Mr. Blevins.
Thank you for having me.
Two-time Emmy winner. That's I think this is our first time talking to an Emmy winner here on the segment, Keith.
I'm feeling a little inadequate. I'm the only person in this interview that hasn't won an Emmy.
Well, the Emmys were giving for the shows, so it was like a group Emmy probably, but each show was nominated for that award.
And you've got two of them, I'm sure. Where do you keep them?
Actually, I didn't get the statue because, believe it or not, I've never lived in California. I've done all my boarding from my home here in Arizona. I was over there one day out of the whole 15, 16 years I've been doing it. But you have to pay for the statue in advance, even if you don't know you're going to win. So it just wasn't that important to me. So I've got a very nice gold embossed certificate.
Is it framed at least?
No, it's in a folder somewhere.
Come on, you got to get that thing up on the wall. Let's we've got come on, Batman Beyond. This is which we'll get into the storyboarding, but which two were the Emmys for?
The Superman show. This is embarrassing, but I'm not going to be able to remember which one.
Was it Lobo, right? I think it was the one with Lobo, the main man.
It could be. I don't remember. It might have been the one with Bizarro.
Okay.
Or there was a really wonderful script where Lois went to an alternate dimension where Superman was kind of a Nazi in partnership with Lex Luthor. Might have been that one. I do remember the Batman Beyond episode, though. That was the Egg Baby.
Ah. That's on. I think that's on the. As we're recording this, I think that's the one that's running on the hub either. I think today.
Really? Well,
I'm obsessed with it. I know. I record these things. It's just I still watch them, the DVDs and everything. So hey, thank you for joining us today on the IndyCast. We really appreciate that. Keith and I have been going issue by issue with this series, and we just wrapped up our reviews of issues 13 and 14, which you did the covers for. You also came in on 19. Before we get to all things indie, though, I'm kind of interested. What was your first comic book memory? What are the things that you remember just as a kid? What sparked your interest?
Well, when I was a tiny kid before school, my father had a friend that he worked with who read comics. And he would throw them all in a box, and every once in a while he'd give them to my dad to bring home to me. And I remember standing on a couch and having a stack of these comics that were taller than I was. That's one of my early memories. But,
were there any specific books, anything in particular, any favorite characters or stories that were in that box that really sparked your imagination?
Well, the early Spider-Man were in there. This would have been the mid-'60s, I guess, maybe 64, somewhere in there, 65. It was before I started school, so I was born in 1960. But
can't go wrong with Ditko.
You can't go wrong with that. And there was a lot of those reprints of the Dick Sprang Batman. So I started off with the big two, Spider-Man and Batman, ones I liked. But,
Is that? Go ahead.
Well, there was just a lot of the old, those Atlas horror comics, and just the mood of all that early stuff really affected me. I really loved poring over them, studying the drawings.
I don't know if we've gone into depth with this, because a lot of artists have kind of said that, but what did that do to the young, impressionable Bret Blevins at that time? when you're seeing these, what a lot of people call funny books, but some of the ones you mentioned, they weren't so funny. I mean, that was some serious stuff for a kid.
Yes. Well, I should point out I had plenty of Uncle Scrooge and Disney and Dennis the Menace as well. But I think when I look back on it now, the effect that those books had in that time was the opening up of imagination, because the film effects and even the amount of fantasy that was done in film in those days was pretty limited and crude, of course, compared to today, obviously. So to get that kind of expanded imagination, you had to do it through the power of drawing, cartooning in this case, which would open up your imagination in that way, because as you recall, those stories had all kinds of science fiction elements, robots and aliens, spaceships. Kirby, of course, in Fantastic Four was nothing but fanciful imagery. And to a young kid, pouring your imagination through that venue of opening it up like that, I think that had a huge impression on a lot of people who eventually became cartoonists, or also filmmakers, But that's what I remember most about it, is that at that time, the best you could get was something like, well, this was before Star Trek even, but you're talking about very tinny, glittery looking cardboard sets and things like that. The Outer Limits, there's some good stories in there and some effective things, but you understand what I mean. It was, the scope of imagination was huge, especially Kirby, of course.
Yeah. Well, this was when the four-color world sort of was a lot more open than what was in other media at the time. Like you said, everything, it was a little on the cheesy side, but comics really opened things up for a lot of kids.
Well, and the fact that you could spend so much time with them, that was another point, because I recall, as a kid, I obviously loved cartoons. I was there every Saturday morning watching Bugs Bunny and Daffy and all those. But you got your little 5-minute hits, then you had to wait another week. But with a comic book, you could sit there and pour over it and over it and over it. So, and the stories were so much longer. I mean, obviously, Carl Barks' Disney work, where they felt epic, their Uncle Scrooge stories. They went all over the world, had all these things happening. So it was a very vivid visual introduction to the realms of the perimeters that your imagination could go to and go past that wasn't available otherwise in the culture at that time. Because even, I loved illustrated books as well. I fell in love with Howard Pyle and Wyeth Parrish and all those fellows from the library when I was a young kid. But again, they were one single intense hit. But with a comic, there was so much of it coming out every month that you could just, you could go into the funny animal world or go visit Kirby or go to something more realistic. They had soap opera comics. They had almost what you would call goofy sitcom type humor, like the Bob Hope, Jerry Lewis type things. So there was a lot of variety of genre that you could not only enjoy, but as I recall, pour over it. You could really spend a lot of time going over every panel and experiencing it, which was not the case in those days where there was no videotape or CDs or streaming, Netflix, anything like that. If you caught something really imaginative that inspired you on television, you were lucky, and then you may not see it again for years. So,
at what point did you get a sense that you could make money at this, or that this could be a job?
Around the age of 11 or 12, I think, because I started sending samples to Marvel and DC, and in those days, Whitman was still publishing when I was 13.
At 11, you were sending samples?
At 13.
Okay.
But I've been thinking about it for a couple of years, is why I'm guessing 11. But I do remember around that time, I knew I wanted to be an artist, and I'd taken art classes at the YMCA and things like that as a young kid. So I seemed to have a knack for it. So that obviously increased my interest in it.
Do you remember what any of those samples were?
Whatever was, popular books at the time. I'm sure I did Spider-Man. I did a lot of the more gothic things like Conan and fantasy type work like that because I was very interested in it. And to be frank, at that age, it's a hell of a lot easier to draw that kind of thing than cities and cars and people in suits. But I tried that too because I figured, that's what I had to do. But I also sent funny animals. I did Roadrunner stories or Mickey Mouse and sent them off to Whitman. I still have some of those somewhere. But I just loved the world of cartooning and drawing and telling stories as I was discovering this by pursuing it at the time. And in the early 70s, there was that boom of they were publishing the portfolios by people, Frazetta's work and Wrightson and Kaluta, and that whole sense of it being more of a having a little bit more respect, at least from the aficionados and the people who were doing it. It was seeming like there was more, I don't know, not prestige. That's not the word that wouldn't have mattered to me at that time, but that there was more possibilities than maybe I had been aware of. When you look at the kind of work Barry Smith was doing, that incredibly elaborate, fanciful work, had not really been around before that. These young guys were coming in who loved the material, but they were also bringing that aesthetic from classic illustration into it. So it was very inspiring. And I think by that time I also realized that my other career ambition of being James Bond was not as likely to happen. So
you're the man, but you're the man with the golden pen.
Well, it's not quite as dangerous.
That could be. We've heard some pretty interesting stories about people that worked for Marvel, but anyway, we'll get into that.
Well, you can't do super spying from home, from the comfort of home either, so that makes it nice.
Well, the other thing is I realized at some point that I was just not going to be able to dance around with all these glamorous situations with that John Barry music playing all the time. It's going to be pretty much runting around trying to avoid getting killed if I went into that line of work. So,
just ink-stained hands was the future for you, right?
Much preferable.
Well, how did you? What were some of the early gigs that you got, and how early on was Marvel? Because I think with Marvel you got into the movie adaptations too early on, right?
Right. What was happening there was I had met through an acquaintance, I guess, that I'd met through. My uncle was a big comic book collector, and he's the one who fed me a lot of this stuff. He was exposing me to the portfolio, that sort of fan publishing thing that was happening. And so I was a little bit in tune with that, and I went to a few conventions early on with him. And through some acquaintance, I got a connection with Al Milgrom, who was an editor then at DC, I think, in those days. So I would send him samples, and this went on from the age of 13 until I started working. So I would do a bunch of samples, send them off, and wait. It might take months for him to get around to be able to have time to respond, but then he would lay out, well, you need to work on perspective, you need to study drapery, whatever it would have been. Then I'd go back again, study some more. I was gathering books all this time and trying to teach myself how to do these things, and that kept going on. And then about 1981, I suppose, he gave me a unscheduled story of Shanna the She-Devil, basically just to work on it and to sort of hammer out these last bugs that I had. So I worked on that for a while, but what I would do is I'd do the entire job, send it in, get his response, and then go back and adjust it. But during that time, I would send in new samples all along. And what happened is I found a press book. Somehow, I don't even remember where I came across this, but it was a press book for the Dark Crystal movie. And it had a lot of Brian Froud's drawings and a lot of photographs of the puppets and the designs. And I just fell in love with a very Arthur Rackham kind of world. So I did a set of samples of those pages, or of those characters, I should say, that had no story, really, because I didn't know the story. I was just making up scenes with these characters in them and sent them along more as drawing samples, I suppose, than storytelling. But what happened is I sent those in. Maybe a week or two later, I got a script in the mail for the adaptation of the Dark Crystal film. No word or explanation whatsoever, so I assumed it was some kind of mistake. So I called Milgrom, and he said, I have no idea. Let me go see who the editor of that book is, and we'll find out what's going on. So about a half an hour later, Louise Simonson called me and said, yeah, I saw those samples laying around. I took them and showed it to Henson. They really like the way you draw the characters, so you're doing the book, and you've got to start right away because it's already 4 weeks late. Just like that, not a breath, So that was my pitch into the the heavy end of the pool there, because that book was 64 pages and a cover, and I think I had 5 weeks to do all that.
Wow.
So I was working around the clock, but I had the energy then. I was 21, I guess. And, or maybe I was only 20. I'd have to check the dates, but I was, I had plenty of energy anyway, and I was so excited finally to be getting on this thing that I knew was going to be published and that I was going to be paid and so forth. And so from that point on, I just never slowed down.
Yeah, you also did the adaptations for some pretty big movies for Krull and The Last Starfighter, things like that. Here on the Further Adventures, we've interviewed several of the creators and artists on the book who have mentioned the Marvel method. Now, I don't think we've ever really defined what that is. Maybe you can give us some insight on that and how it differs from DC.
Well, the Marvel method is not a very precise term, for one thing. That may be where some of the confusion comes from. But what it generally means is that the writer works out the plot of the story and maybe some key pieces of dialogue. It depends on the writer, sometimes not. Some writers, like Claremont's a good example, sends a small novella. So you would have so much backstory on his scripts were thick. He really poured all this thought into everything that was going on behind the scenes. Things that had nothing to do with that story or would appear in it, but just so you would know that this had happened to this character when they were 12. He put that in there. So his were very dense. Others were very light. But the idea being that you had the structure of the plot and the story, and that gave the artist freedom to interpret that as dramatically as possible without being tied down to the sequence of the dialogue balloons, because that's where the limitation comes from working in the full script method. In other words, in comic book storytelling, whoever speaks first has to be either on the top or the left side of the panel. So the dialogue will be read in the correct order. Otherwise, you have tails of balloons crossing. So the Marvel method allowed for a more dynamic visual flow, and one of the other benefits of it was it tended to decrease the amount of repetitive exposition. So in other words, the captions wouldn't have to describe what you could see. The DC method is much tighter and confining in a way, but in another way, more exact, because then you could really plan exactly how the artist then places the balloons, how they want them to flow through the page and pull the eye around, and you compose the pictures to support that. So the Marvel methods definitely has more freedom, but then you're at the mercy of the writer following through and doing a good job. And most of them were very good at it, but occasionally you work with someone who seemed to be visually, shall we say, not acute, let's say. So
impaired.
Impaired. I didn't want to suggest that blindness, but
that brings us up to Further Adventures. How did you get the gig?
You mean the covers or the?
Yeah, you got the 13, 14, and 19 on the covers.
Well, this is a long time ago, fellas. I'm going to try and remember this, but my memory of those days is it was so much fun in the early 80s at Marvel, because it was a very freewheeling kind of atmosphere, and everybody was there to tell good stories, and there was a lot of freedom to do that. And their direct market was just beginning, and there seemed to be, it had, as you probably recall, the comics very nearly went under in the late 70s. They had that DC implosion where they didn't publish for a few months, and it looked pretty bad. Then it seemed to turn around and start to grow, and there was epic comics. Speaking of Michelini, I did the Boz Chronicles with Michelini, which is one of my favorite projects. But I was just walking, I would imagine I was just walking around in the bullpen, and somebody came up to me and asked me if I'd like to do a cover. That's the way it used to happen.
Well, were you already a fan of Indiana Jones? I mean, you obviously knew who Indiana Jones was. Had you already seen Raiders, and were you excited when you got the job?
Oh, for sure. I'd seen Raiders, yes. I was excited when I got the job because it allowed me to draw what we used to call civilian material, because I was very interested in that, and there wasn't a lot of that going on in those days. As you recall, that was the climb of the superhero dominating everything. So the fact that you could actually draw a real person wearing ordinary clothes, and because it was a period piece, I loved that. the antique feel of all the cars and that sort of thing. So, it felt to me more like doing an old-fashioned comic book, something from the 50s, adventure stories. Comic books from the 50s, but material, of course, was in the 30s. But yeah, I was very excited to do any job at that point, really, because it was all new to me. I was anything that was thrown at me, I was just delighted to tackle and try and figure out an effective way to do it.
Well, we have the advantage on this segment of getting some of the history of the book. We've talked to Elliot Brown, we've talked to David Michelini, we've talked to a lot of the creators. What I'm noticing on these books, and correct me if I'm wrong, 13 was penciled by Ricardo Belamonte. 13 and 14 look to be when Louise Jones was exiting the book. Elliot Brown was coming on to the book. 14 looked to be a fill-in issue that he wanted Herb Trimp to be the regular penciler on the book. This one was done by David Mazzucchelli. It was already done. And 19 was one of those dun-dun-dun fill-in issues where it was sitting in Elliot Brown's desk, and if the book was late, he had this as the go-to. So it looked like for these three covers, you were kind of like the emergency backup. Like they hit the panic button and get Bret Blevins in here and help us knock these things out. Is that a fair assessment?
It could be. I don't want to swear to it because like I said, this was a long, long time ago. But I knew Elliot. And like I said, it was very much like a party up there often. Everybody in the bullpen, a lot of horsing around and goofing off. And when you come into the office, usually a gang of people would go out to lunch. And so it could have been that sort of thing where I was just standing there talking to him and said, hey, would you like to do some covers for me? But what his motivations were, what kind of situation he was in, I don't know. I don't want to swear to that. We
thank you for keeping the book on track 30 years later. So, retroactively, thank you for that. Hey, let's talk about these covers. We've had 13, 14, 19. The first one was for Deadly Rock. And we've got that cover of Indy being dragged behind a plane as he's hanging onto a chain. Keith, I was a little rough on this one, I think. And in fairness to me, though, I think 14 was just so different and unique that I think I probably give 13 a little bit of a short shrift on it. But looking back, I'm warming up to it a lot more. But, man, you knocked the hat off. This is something that frequently comes up with indie artists. Who was it? Gamble? Was it Kerry Gamble that said, "I just didn't want to draw the hat"?
Yeah.
So, Bret, you knocked the hat off again. Maybe that's why I took points off.
Well, I will say that I didn't know anything about the hat issue, but for me, I'm sure it was a way of trying to indicate movement. That would be my guess.
All right, I'll give you that. Okay, I'll give you that.
Since he's being dragged, it seemed like a way to activate the shapes of the composition to make it look more active. Because I use that a lot. Things flying off or capes flying or people, that's a way of indicating action in a still image. So that's what would be my guess.
Well, luckily he got to keep the hat on the cover for issue 19 when he's being dragged by the dragon. So I think
he made up for it with that.
Yeah, you made up for it. You came around. Very cool. Now, we gotta mention issue 14's cover here. You went the fully painted route, and I gotta say this is really one of, if not the most unique cover of the entire run. Is there a specific reason why you went fully painted?
I'm sure I was just full of beans and wanted to do it. I don't know if I was paid any more for it at the time. I don't remember, but
was there any issue with it? I mean, did you talk about it with Elliot Brown ahead of time, or was it just here's the cover and he's like, whoa?
I'm sure I would have had to mention that it was going to be painted. I'm sure that was the case, but I think I had painted a cover. I painted the cover to the Dark Crystal, and I think I had done a couple of other things that were used for licensing images that probably no one ever saw. They were maybe for coloring books or something. I don't remember, but I was just eager to try anything and use any medium. I was there to learn, and so I'm sure I probably suggested that just so I could play around with it. But I remember it was a gouache painting, and I don't actually know what happened to that painting. I haven't seen it in years. So
you don't have the original?
I haven't seen it in probably 10 or 15 years, but I don't recall ever giving it away or anything, so I don't know what happened to that. Maybe I lost it in one of my moves. I don't know.
There's we got to put Professor Jones on this.
Yeah, we got to get Indy on that job.
Is it in a warehouse somewhere in a crate?
Well, I had it. I know I had it. They did return it to me, but I don't know. Maybe I'll find it. Maybe it's stuck in some odd box somewhere. But,
well, if you need any help, we'll be more than happy to come on over and help you look for it.
Some antechamber.
Yeah. Well, I have the soundtracks for all of the Indy films, so we can play that while we're digging.
That sounds like
I could think of no better way to spend a weekend, but then I have no life either. So this cover's fantastic. We just reviewed issue 14. We talked about that. I noticed your hair, especially, and we'll talk about Last Crusade as we get into it, and especially on cover 19, your Harrison Ford is really spot on. Now in 14, it looks like you took a liberty of maybe not making it look exactly like Harrison Ford and Karen Allen. Can you give us a little bit of the thought process behind that?
And I'm showing my ignorance here. Now, 14 is the painted one.
14 is the painted one. This is with Pondexter with his crazy helmet on, and their Indian and Marion are crashing through the burning covered bridge, which broke my heart in issue 14 because I'm a covered bridge fan. But, it looks like – and I kind of like when it deviates from the actor. It doesn't necessarily always have to look like Harrison Ford and Karen Allen, but I think it's stellar.
Well, thank you. But without having it in front of me and it being so long ago, I probably wouldn't be able to answer that very effectively. But I think sometimes you just want to, depending on as I recall, their faces are pretty small, correct? So that might have been, I didn't think, maybe I felt it wasn't that important, and the whole mood of the image was the important aspect to concentrate on. Because I remember the one with the dragon, his face is very close to the camera.
Yeah.
So it seemed important. And plus, it was a chance to do a funny expression. But I think my memory of that is the whole setting of the scene. Everything's on fire, there's smoke, and it's all hot orange color. So I probably was just thinking more about the paint quality of it than getting the likeness. Because I remember they're pretty small, it seems. What did I do with the hat on that one? Is that still on? Or?
It's off of them. It's more of a It's kind of like it looks like a hole in the wall kind of.
The hat's off.
Yeah, we hear.
You got your movement again.
Like we mentioned earlier, a lot
as
of
long as he gets it back, though.
They just didn't like to draw the hat. They just couldn't nail it. So you think that was one of the reasons why you didn't quite give it so much detail, or was it another reason? Or
I have to be completely honest. I don't think I was giving it any thought whatsoever at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, in this aspect of it, because I'm sure I had reference on the hats, and I was figuring out how they were structured. But
the one on 19 looks amazing. I think the one on 19, you nailed it.
Yeah. And in all fairness, we only had Raiders at the time because we don't have the hat joke yet. Actually, in Raiders, he loses the hat on the sub, or never had it. But the hat joke, I don't think, enters into the picture until Temple of Doom. When he reaches back, it's kind of a callback to the whip joke from Raiders, where he reaches back in and gets it. But then we start having the hat jokes come in. But yeah, I don't think you guys had that as a reference point at the time.
No, I don't remember. I don't even remember knowing at that time. I remember reading later, or maybe I saw someone interviewed, that he kept the hat on because it was so much easier to keep track of the daily shooting that way. That became part of what spawned the joke, I suppose.
Yeah, and if there's a stuntman involved, it's easier to conceal the face as well too. Yes. So, when we're talking about these 13 and 14, and we've got our own thoughts on 19 as well. But did you have the interior art as reference for the covers, or is it just like here's a little bit of a plot point and just go wild with it?
In those days, everything was running close to the bone, so they may not have actually had the issue finished. Usually what would happen is you would ask the editor what the most obvious scene would be to do, because I don't remember seeing material on that, but I'm doing the math in my head. This is about 30 years ago, right?
Yep, correct.
Okay, well, it's hard for me to remember exactly what was happening there.
And our apologies for that. I can't remember what I did last week, and we're always asking people to kind of remember these things. But yeah,
well, I do remember I enjoyed drawing the biplane or the old plane. I looked that up and found some reference for that, so that was fun.
Well, you can't forget Fing Fang Foom's, cousin, brother. I don't know. Keith, what do you think that was? I don't even.
I actually always thought it was Fing Fang Foom, but I mean, you know.
Dragon by the Tail. Let's start, what are your recollections of Dragon by the Tail? Because it's so mysterious. I mean, and Indy is so. I think that's why I like that cover a little better than 13, because Indy is so prominent on this one, and you've got the hat, and you did get that as you referenced, that kind of like funny look on his face, but that shadowing and of the dragon. It's like we don't know what that is, but obviously it says Dragon by the Tail, but we don't get a look at the dragon itself.
Well, I may be misremembering this as well, but I tend to. I'm thinking that one of the ideas that spawned that particular composition was the fact that they didn't have a reference for that dragon at the time I did that, I believe. I think that's why I did it as a shadow.
Wow.
So it might have been a limitation of information that then spawned the idea for the cover. I mean, you have to do that kind of thing all the time in entertainment.
Well, I think it's kind of cool that the dragon wasn't actually shown on the cover. It leaves more to the imagination. Makes you want to read the book, open the book. So I think it's pretty cool that it's just a shadow.
That's a happy accident.
I think, I think it works for the cover actually.
And that may not even be accurate, but I do, the reason. But I remember thinking that it was, it would be nice to have the joke realized sort of a beat after you look at it. You see him and you don't realize what's going on until you notice the shadow. It made it a little funnier. So.
Right.
No, I think if you had seen the dragon on the cover, I think it's more ominous. I think it's a little more menacing this way. It might have been a little bit more cheesy. It is, in all honesty, it is one of the cheesiest stories in the run. I mean, it's a dragon, for God's sake. So, was there any? I know Elliot Brown had wanted Herb Trimpe on the book. Was there any thought on your part that you can recall of like, boy, I'd really like to be the regular penciler on this book, or is it just, it's Indy, just another gig, I'm kind of moving on?
Probably to answer that, I would have to know what else I was doing at the time. I think that might have been around the era of the Voss Chronicles, so I was really enjoying that. So I wouldn't have wanted to give that up. But I'm not sure. I'd have to have the dates in front of me.
This would have been 84.
Yeah, so it would be right in there.
Early 84.
I also have to say that it isn't always easy working on licensed projects. I don't recall having any problems on these covers, but on other things I've done, depending on who is in charge of overseeing it or approving it, sometimes it can get very difficult with dealing with someone who doesn't understand the nature of illustration or comic book storytelling, and they're hung up on some sort of obsessive detail of their own. Years later, I did things for, stuff that had no interest for me personally, things like the Power Rangers or that sort of thing. And people can be so picky about, what. In other words, or I guess what I'm trying to say is, in those days, that sort of freewheeling atmosphere I'm talking about, you got a script and you just went home and had a blast doing whatever, making it as cool and as fun as and exciting, dramatic as you could. But sometimes with a license project, everything had to be approved by some official person designated to do that job. And depending on how savvy they were, they could make things needlessly difficult.
Well, there you have it, part one of our interview with Bret Blevins. I'm actually glad we got the Marvel method a bit more defined in that one.
Yeah, that's right. But it seems that his experience with Marvel was a bit more positive than that of some of the other people we've interviewed here.
I got a sense of that as well. Yeah, he seemed a little bit more upbeat about it. So, and I tell you what, I was what a positive experience too, hearing about the original artwork for the cover of issue 14. I hope he can track that down.
Yeah, I hope he can track that down too. And of course, we'll let the listeners know if we get anything from Bret, and we'll definitely post it on our Facebook page for sure.
Yeah, and as you notice, he comes out of the interview. We ended part one with the mention of licensed projects. That segues nicely into part two, where we're going to talk about Bret's Last Crusade adaptation, his working with Lucasfilm, deleted scenes, and a lot more, much, much more.
Cool. But for now, there's much more in the mailbox.
Mister, get your arm out of that mailbox. I mean now.
Oh, dear me. I haven't had so much trouble delivering a package since the incident in Vienna.
Well, our first email this week comes in from Jeff Butler, and he writes, question for issue number 13. I've always wondered, What was the rationale behind the one-page extra at the end of the issue with our hero running the gauntlet but getting a pie in the face for his lateness? Were pies in the face an actual penalty for tardiness at that time? I love Indiana Jones, and I love slapstick pie humor, so this was a big surprise when I first saw it. Thanks for any help and much continued success to you. Well, thanks a lot for that email, Jeff. But yeah, as you probably have heard, that was Assistant Editors Month, and Elliot Brown, I don't think normally a pie in the face was...
Hey, as crazy as it got at Marvel, who knows?
Actually, that's true. Yeah, who knows? But I think it was all in good fun. I think they were just having some fun with it, and just like what we talked about on our issue 13 review, which was a few weeks ago. So if you didn't listen to it, go back and listen to it, and we talk all about the adventures of Massachusetts Brown.
Our next email is from Mark Leibowitz. This is from the Further Adventures Facebook page. Hey guys, I've been catching up on the Further Adventures, both the podcast segment and the comics. You have a great segment on the show. What I like most about it is the fact that it's at the level of everyone else listening, so to speak. Many times I hear podcasts that, for better or for worse, become very successful, and the show loses its intimacy with the listeners. As a fellow podcaster, I can tell it's fun to be able to keep things real and having that connection between hosts and listeners. Looking forward to more adventures. All the best. Well, thanks, Mark. We appreciate those comments. We love the interactive nature of this. We love that everyone out there is reading the comic books along with us. We love getting the feedback, ask the questions. Sometimes we learn things about the issues themselves from our listeners. So
yeah, we sure do.
Keep following along.
And we like doing this too. I mean, it's just really a lot of fun to be able to do this every show. We're having a lot of fun doing it. And our next email comes in from Young Indy's Laird Malamud. And Laird writes, hey guys, great recap today of Demons. I actually really like that issue. Well, we do too, Laird. While the look of Marion is not really on, the writing is for the most part perfect. There's some very nice art, and the panel changes he noted, the boulders. It's not as complex as other stories, but as a fill-in and quick read, I found it a pleasure. With plenty of tie-ins to the rest of the universe, including presaging some of it, again as you two spoke about. You also said that Indy was being very mean about Marion's weight. The go on a diet comment seemed out of character. However, my thought when reading the issue when Marion said she was gaining weight made me think she's pregnant. That makes Indy's comment even more mean, but this writing seems to tie nicely into why Indy abandoned Marion before the wedding, and Marion being pregnant now would fit too. I don't recall how many more issues she appears in, so maybe this timing isn't right, but it's something to think about. As always, thanks for the trip down memory lane. Keep up the good work. Well, thanks a lot for that, Laird.
That's an interesting theory there. That had not occurred to me.
Well, I did a little investigative reporting about the possibility of Marion being pregnant, or at least at the beginning of her pregnancy with Mutt in this issue. Now, Marion's last appearance in the comic series before we'll see her again in Crystal Skull is issue 25, Good as Gold, where she leaves a note for Indy telling him not to look for her at the very end of the issue. Now, this adventure takes place in 1936. I'm talking about Demons. So it seems that there must have been another meeting of the two not seen before Indy leaves her a week before the wedding. Then on Marion's page on Indy Wiki, it says this. It seems that eventually they were reunited and even planning to marry. 1 week before the wedding, though, Indy reconsidered and thought it would not work. It was his turn to disappear, and the two did not meet again for nearly 20 years. Unbeknownst to Jones, she had also taken away his son. Marion had become pregnant in the fall of 1937. In July 1938, Marion gave birth to Henry Jones III. So, unfortunately, like we always say whenever we review these, a lot of things are connected, but unfortunately, this is not connected. They must have met again after the comic series ended, some story that we don't know about, that hasn't been written yet, and that's where the, I guess, the event...
the blessed event?
event must have taken place before Indy leaves her.
That's a great theory, though. When I first saw that email from Laird, I thought, wow, that would actually be pretty cool. But yeah, if you do the math, but you know what? Why not? There's always a little bit of wiggle room in the Indy universe for some of these things. So
you could also even say that maybe Marion got pregnant on the Bantu Wind. You know, maybe they had a little moment there, and that's when she initially got pregnant with Mutt. But, I mean, you know, if you do the math, unfortunately it doesn't work with...
Regardless of anything. Harsh comment. Come on, Dr. Jones. He's up.
Exactly. But thanks a lot for that email, Laird.
And our final email, Steve from Calgary writes in, "Hey guys, had a great time reading along with you guys with issue 14. It was a decent standalone issue, and I really liked how it shed light on the troubled relationship between Indy, Marion, and even Abner. A couple of things bugged me. The boulders. The boulders. We're getting more information on the boulders. I just found it hard to believe that Pondexter managed to get out of his car while being closely chased, climb to the top of a hill, cause a rock slide, climb back down the hill, and still manage to be ahead of Indy. Wow! The next was Indy's whip when he and Marion are climbing out of the window. How long is that whip? 30 feet? I do believe the writers took liberties with Indy's whip length to suit their story needs. Interesting commentary on the research for negative testimonies for Temple of Doom. I do not recall any such negative incidents. I really did not hear any real criticism for Temple of Doom until much later after its release. During its run in 1984, there was nothing but a positive buzz, and it was regarded as one of the most exciting movies of all time. In fact, the Calgary Sun newspaper gave Temple of Doom a 5 out of 5 star review. Raiders only got 4. Everyone I knew, including their parents, all loved the movie and had no issue with it. I do recall the PG-13 talk later in the summer, but that really does not reflect negatively for Temple of Doom in my opinion. I'm really not sure when all this negativity towards Temple of Doom started. My first recollection of it was when Last Crusade came out, and news articles were talking about how Last Crusade was Spielberg's apology for Temple of Doom. I kept thinking, what the heck was wrong with Temple of Doom, and why is he apologizing? It wasn't until then that I started hearing all this negative feedback about it being dark and not for kids. Are people forgetting Temple of Doom was the #1 movie worldwide in 1984? Not Ghostbusters, not Beverly Hills Cop, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I'm not sure what sparked all the negativity we hear today, but I do believe it is blown way out of proportion, and people just jumped on the bandwagon as it was a trend to not like Temple of Doom. Anyway, can't wait to hear your review of issue 15. I got it out, and I'm ready to go. Hey, thanks, Steve. We appreciate, we're ready to go on issue 15, too. So thanks for all the thoughts. Very cool issue with 14. We kind of thought some of those same things, especially if you read some of those Readers of the Lost Ark letters in the comic book. People had talked about the length of Indy's whip and, was it more of just a visual thing so that the artist could have some fun with that as opposed to actually how long the whip is? But, yeah, I think you're right. I think it does get them out of a few jams. And it was crazy long in that issue.
Yeah, they definitely took liberties for sure. But, we still enjoy the heck out of these stories, so why not?
No, okay, that's it for the day then.
Well, as Indy says, that's all the time we have for today. Keith, we really want to hear from those listeners about these issues. We appreciate all the feedback we got today. Where can they send those emails?
As always, thefurtheradventures@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of these interviews. We have a lot more coming up for you guys.
Bret Blevins, Part 2, next time on The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones.